Okay, folks, we are live, no pomp and circumstance tonight. We felt the need to go live and do this, unfortunately, because of some announcements and some information we've been getting over the last probably an hour and a half or so, JB. We want to go through the conferences of the East and tell you where we stand. We will include some rumors and tell you where the rumors are such, just so that we are fully on board with you as to what the information is. Things can change in those situations, please don't forget. But obviously, we are perilously close to losing the entire fall 2020 football season in the East region. And I think if you hear me say that and JB say that right now, it sort of gives you a wake-up call, because we are two of the bigger optimists out there about what things mean. On our July 3rd show, you probably remember what we were saying about different fatality rates, different possibilities, etc. Thank you for your viewership in that show. It was our most viewed show ever. So again, thank you for all that. But the bad news is getting worse in terms of I don't want to say cold feet, but decisions being made. Let's go to tonight's specific news. We're going to break some news right now. Again, in multiple sources. We would not report this unless we had multiple sources telling us this information. The MASCAC will be coming out in the morning, we believe, to state that they will not be playing fall sports. They are considering spring football as a possibility and may offer individual schools the ability to petition the league or the presidents of the league to play some one-offs in the fall if they so choose. But overall, the MASCAC will not be playing fall 2020 football and other fall sports. That one hits pretty hard, JB, because we did mention on the July 3rd show we had not been getting much information about the MASCAC, and it seems like there was some pro and con, from what I understand, in that conference, in the discussions, and that might be why that was happening. Limited flexibility, not as much as what we saw from the ECFC this morning. We'll talk about them in a moment, but your thoughts on the MASCAC right now, and then we'll talk about the other conference that announced, or that we believe will announce tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the dominoes continue to fall. We back on the 3rd, we talked about the MASCAC as being a potentially strong candidate for trying to keep a regional system in place, because all the schools are so closely geographically anyway together, and that there would be really no need for major travel or costs, and you'd think contact tracing and things like that would be easy to do if should anything happen. The state of Massachusetts is doing very well, very low incidences of COVID by this point, but it's also, these are state-run institutions, and there might be budget concerns that could be affecting the situation. So unfortunate on one hand. For some reason, I thought you were going to say another conference, Frank, that was in New England. And
we'll talk about that in a minute. We won't jump too far ahead. Let's get to the actual news tonight that we're either breaking or have. That is the Empire 8. We understand that the Empire 8, we don't have the full details on this one from our sourcing. However, it looks like the Empire 8 will not be playing football at the very least in fall 2020. Whether or not that extends to other fall sports, we'll find out, I believe, at 9:30 p.m. tonight. We're expecting a release from the conference. But football appears to be out for the Empire 8, and we don't believe there is a flexibility quotient in that announcement coming up. But again, we will see and hope that there is one, because obviously this affects the Liberty League. We'll talk about that in a second as well, because we're going to go around the horn of what's left out there in a moment. But the Empire 8 canceling is a real kick in the pants, I guess, for the Liberty League. And we did get a reaction from Tracy King earlier of the Liberty League, who said, essentially, we'll have to go back to the drawing board to see what our options are, paraphrasing him. We'll talk about a couple of those potential options in a moment. But JB, Empire 8, most likely, from what we understand, out.
Yeah, that's a league that's also a combination of some state and private schools. maybe schools with not the largest endowments, but it did seem, based on all the other indications that we had seen as far as reopenings and so on, that you thought that perhaps that athletics would be in the mix, but unfortunately not. It does leave, some of the other upstate New York teams, once again, an area with limited to next to no COVID situation right now. But I guess they're opting to play it safe. It could be a financial reason, could be a number of different reasons. But yeah, once again, another conference deciding to go down, but we do not know for sure whether or not, like the ECFC that announced early this morning, that they were not going to sponsor sports as a conference. They did basically say, for the teams that want to play and have an interest in, we'll support you guys. We're not going to count games as conference games, which basically to me sounds like what we've been talking about before, Frank. The Pool A bids are just going to keep going down. There's going to be a lot of conferences that just pass on a playoff altogether, probably. But at least, for I think the 4 or 5 remaining teams, maybe it's only 4 now that Gallaudet opted out a few hours earlier. So Anna Maria, Castleton, Alfred State, and so on. They may still be trying to fight to find a place to play. The Liberty League and Alfred State is a pretty good match if that's something that can happen, but we'll have to wait and see.
And now you can.
I was like,
mute button on the live show.
Frank has gone speechless.
Some people would love that, I'm sure. It's especially some conferences as we break news tonight. And look,
too.
I want to say one thing to the conferences that we are breaking news on tonight. If it wasn't student athletes' livelihoods and lives in the balance here, every day counts right now, folks. Because they have decisions to make at their institutions on whether they want to defer or not, travel that they'll be buying to go back to school or not, and a lot more than just that. Every hour and day and everything else counts right now for these student athletes. So if we're wrong, I hope we are in these cases, to be honest with you. I would love to be wrong tonight. However, again, we do source it with several people before we do it, but at least it's going to give them pause to think about what they're, if they're on an airline site, for instance, trying to get their tickets ready to go back to school or something like that, or a U-Haul or whatever. So this matters right now for the student athletes. That has been our MO from day one on our programming related to COVID, the student athletes. And so if you want to hate us for this or hate me personally, go ahead. But at the same time, we have to perform this service right now. This is meaningful to what we are really out here doing, ultimately. Conference by conference. We have no graphics to go with this because this is spur of the moment, but here we go. ECFC you discussed. Basically 4 teams left out there, as we've seen Dean fall by the wayside and Gallaudet fall by the wayside. We have your son in the background.
You're on the internet, buddy. There you go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That'll make the. It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
The photo bomb. There you go.
That will make the highlight reel someday. At least we can laugh about something tonight.
Oh,
Classic moment right there. But anyway, we're going to say the ECFC is going to have some trouble, as you said. There are some main teams out there that might be able to help fulfill the New England version of the ECFC teams. We don't know fully yet. In fact, we were hearing that Colby might be a school that from the NASCAC that might be considering crossing over, which we never hear about, to play in the fall to do that. We'll see what happens. That is possible. But the NASCAC is allowing schools to make the decision ultimately if they want to play non-conference games, but we didn't think that was going to be applicable to football. Now we're not so sure after Matt Noonan's rumor mill on that one this afternoon came out. But for all intents and purposes, the NESCAC is out for the fall, considering spring football. The MASCAC, spring football is a consideration. Some one-offs in the fall, as we reported. This is to be announced tomorrow morning, we believe, in the following manner, or the previous manner, I guess I should say, now that we've just said it. But the MASCAC not playing in the fall, it looks like. The new MAC, we have lost MIT already. And for as much as the RPI Union scenario was a kind of a twofer, and a lot of people don't want to believe our reporting about RPI's decision swaying Union, folks, we have multiple on that one as well. And I will tell you, as a Union guy, it wouldn't surprise me that it's true. I apologize to those that don't want to believe it, that I'm being steadfast on that information, but I am. So, again, pin it on me if you want, but we have multiple sources, important sources at that, on that information. But going back to the new MAC, I feel like the WPI MIT situation will be kind of like what Union and RPI ultimately were. We'll see. WPI would be a big loss for the new MAC if they don't go forward. I understand Springfield's trying, but again, it's going to be what happens with the new MAC as a whole. The military institutions seem like they want to go, but then, that's Norwich, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, but not much information flowing in that direction. There's a decision to be made, from what I understand, later this week by the new MAC. The news coming out of the MASCAC is probably not going to be good for that decision. So I would not be surprised at this point if the new MAC says no, but maybe provides the flexibility the ECFC did. That is conjecture here, folks. That is not true, known information. So please remember that. The CCC has lost Becker today in the whole fold of playing this season. What it means for the rest of them, this is another conference that's been a little eerily quiet, and I would say the way the new MAC goes, the CCC goes too on this, if I had to guess. Conjecture again, but it's dominoes. JB, it's a lot of game with dominoes.
Yeah, but we do know there's at least 2 CCC programs that are very much interested in planning on moving forward. I guess it'll ultimately depend on whether their president or the respective presidents rather, agree with that approach and let maybe if the conference goes the ECFC's way and allows teams to go out and schedule, then that's one thing. But if it's, the president's kind of united, like we saw with the the Centennial wasn't exactly a united front, but maybe with some of these other conferences that do say, at least in one hand, we're canceling sports and everyone's in line, but a lot of schools are still trying to keep the door open. Whether that's realistic or not, time will tell.
That is New England, I believe. We had the New MAC CCC, ECFC, MASCAC, and NESCAC we've talked about. The Empire 8 we've discussed now, coming out with an announcement probably in the next hour or so. I'm trying to get my clock up on my screen here. However, it's not going to
supposed to be I thought it was tonight or tomorrow morning.
9:30 tonight is what I'm hearing. 9:30 p.m. And I've heard that from 2 different sources tonight. So we'll see if that does materialize. But the Empire 8 appears to be out. We don't know about the flexibility level as of this live show being recorded, we'll call it. Liberty League. No RPI, no Union. That leaves 5 teams. Tracy King probably was taken by surprise to a degree about the Empire 8 because I think they were relying on the Empire 8 to fill 2 to 3 games per team as non-conference games. So can the Liberty League do it? The answer is yes, but they're going to have to play home and homes, basically, because the status of the state of New York appears to be who knows what level of travel will be allowed in and out of the state of New York come September, October, November. So unless your schedule is completely New York based, you may have a real problem traveling the student athletes from New York and outside, or to an outside state, and then getting them back in without having to quarantine them for 2 weeks. That's where we are here in the state of New York, because there are 22 states that cannot come into, whose travelers can't come into New York without quarantining right now, as of last count. And so you can't risk the quarantine factor and make a schedule at this point unless it's all New York State teams. You can get the student athletes into the state in the first place for the 14-day quarantine, but you can't necessarily rely on the travel that comes with the football schedule. So Hobart, St. Lawrence, let's see if I can do this correctly.
Rochester.
Ithaca, Rochester. And we are forgetting about one.
Buffalo State, which ironically was part of the Empire 8 previously until the Liberty League needed to pull them under the fold to keep their automatic qualifier. So do they have to follow the same deal as, like, let's say, at Brockport or Morrisville, some of these other Cortland, these other SUNY schools? I don't know, but you're down to already 4 games basically for in conference with the Liberty League, and Ithaca hasn't technically announced what their fall plan is, other than they initially came out very, very early on saying students back on campus by October 5th. Nothing on athletics. Susan Bassett, the AD, put out a statement a few weeks back, basically kind of saying a lot without really saying anything. The usual stuff that you'd expect from a college administrator about, the safety and the task force, and it's all valid and important, but there was no final line that says, we're going to have a decision by this date, or we're definitely going to do athletics, or we're definitely not. So if Ithaca jumps, then things get a little more tenuous for the upstate New York schools, and then maybe they start looking towards the spring. But as we've talked about previously, there's a lot of concerns by medical and other professionals around what spring football really means.
Yeah, we're going to try to get some information on that in a future mini show coming up here in the next week or so. We'll fill you in on that when we do have that ability. But again, Liberty League, the way that they could fill a schedule is with home and homes, and whether or not they would make all those league games or not would be a whole different question. First, they have to determine if that's even worth doing if they have 5 or 4 teams remaining in the Liberty League. You could have 6 or 8 games that way, depending on how it pans out. The MAC seems to be in a go position for their conference. I believe did we hear maybe one MAC team was swaying out, if I remember correctly, and I'm just trying to think back here. I don't have the list in front of me, but basically, even if the MAC were to play all league games, they wouldn't be able to probably play 10 games this fall.
When we did our update, basically they all listed reopening dates around basically in between the 17th of August or the 24th, give or take a week or so. Everyone was planning on reopening with some type of fall semester. Lebanon Valley Lycoming had formed a reopening task force, but they hadn't made an announcement either way about what they were doing. And the interesting thing with the MAC, Frank, see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 teams. Yep. There's no way that they're going to play all 11 games the way things are shaking out.
10 games, yeah.
10 basically, yeah. So maybe there's opportunities for some of these MAC schools, depending on their location, to help out some of these other East Region schools, or maybe they don't. They just, they keep to their typical conference schedule, and they just count those as, the 2 outliers, as we said before, is FDU and Stevenson. Those are the only 2 schools that are not in Pennsylvania. I don't think that's necessarily going to affect them, per se, but, maybe FDU's location could open it up to, if a possible opponent approached it in the New York, New Jersey area, they could potentially do that if Coach Robertson decided to go that route.
I'm going to go into one shot here for a minute and talk about the last remaining conference here, and that is the NJAC. We've heard rumors. We were happy about a Montclair announcement earlier today that looked like they were good to go for fall sports. And then we heard some rumors back. Again, these are strictly rumors, so we don't believe the decision is final. But we want to address it because it's something that makes us scratch our heads a little bit and kind of goes back to our July 3rd show. The consideration on the table, from what we understand, is that the NJAC is considering playing all fall sports in the fall except for football and considering spring football. It seems like a very odd type of decision, to be honest with you. This is kind of, first off, the question of why is football going to be considered more dangerous than soccer or field hockey or any other fall sport in terms of spread of COVID, since we breathe heavily and sweat and everything else you may consider as something that could cause COVID to spread. We don't believe spread can cause it, although we've heard differing opinions on that. So why is football being singled out if that is the case? On top of it, remember something. And so this is to all the conferences out there considering spring football. We have already screwed over a spring term of athletics in Division 3 because we lost the spring last year. Now, for 2-sport athletes, 2-sport coaches, the fall-spring connection that exists in a lot of these situations, we would do it again, because essentially you're going to tell the fall sport athletes they have to make a choice. Many would choose football, I would guess, over lacrosse or baseball, although maybe they wouldn't. Well, we would see, but they would not have their full teams on the field in the spring again. That would be 2 straight spring seasons screwed by the entire process. If you have the ability and potential to play in the fall, let alone the safety issues that are out there right now that we're considering discussing here in the next few days, with concussions, head trauma, body trauma, etc., with a number of games being played in an 8-month period, if you have the potential to play in the fall and you're doing other sports in the fall anyway, play in the fall. It just doesn't make any sense why you wouldn't at this point, especially if you're not in New York and New England, where it seems like we're having a full-on shutdown for football. But as you go further south and west, it seems like folks are holding true to the idea that they want to play at this point. JB, I'll give you the floor on this one. What's your thought?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think with respect to spring football, with Coach Ray over at Williams College, and just the amount of logistics, how do you organize all the different games at different times if they're using the same field, like a lacrosse and football team, or trying to use the main stadium. Do you have enough athletic trainers? Do you maybe it's a shortened season? Certainly I've seen certain high schools throughout the country that are considering that, particularly in warm weather states like California. The state of Florida so far is still planning on moving forward, although maybe at a later date. So at this point, it's kind of who knows. If more and more teams, though, continue to just decide to tap out and drop out and not even attempt to have a season, then the next logical thing is, the coaches and players will probably be looking to the NCAA for some direction on, okay, well, if the fall is going to not happen, what kind of season are we looking at in the spring? Well, we're still waiting for the NCAA to opine on the season for this fall, if there is going to be one. So good luck finding out anything on the spring until maybe January. But I don't know.
Let me tell you, though, honestly, folks, if the NCAA had given us some guidance about 3 weeks ago, I think schools would have been able to make decisions faster, maybe more in the positive if the requirements related to testing were known and were considered reasonable at that point in time. I think the fear of being wrong or changing a decision is so overblown right now that we have become scared of our own shadow in the whole process of this. Again, it's about safety. I get it. And JB, you get it as well. I know we talk about it daily. But at the same time, there needs to be a leadership principle in these situations, and even leaders inside the NCAA that we talk to that may not be directly employed by them are wondering the same thing. Where is the leadership and guidance that is needed at a time like this for these answers, or at least general guidelines as to what they're going to do or promote ultimately? You may get a backlash now if you put out guidance and it suddenly makes it less palatable to hold a football season. And so what difference is it if you're wrong early or wrong late ultimately if you're the NCAA? Actually, I would say I'd rather be wrong early and then say, oops, sorry, than basically say, oh yeah, well, hate to rain on your parade, but here we go. And then what? People will differ on that. I understand that. But the point ultimately becomes we need some guidance. Maybe the MAC goes next and the NJAC goes next. We don't know. We hope the CCC, New MAC, etc. will stick with it here in the Liberty League in New York and New England. Right now, it's not looking great. We admit.
Yeah, I know that D3Football.com just tweeted that basically on their sort of tracking list at their website, we're basically at 15% of the division basically saying that they're out. So in theory, that means 85% are in, but a lot of that 85% have yet to opine. Even in the East region where we have 9 total conferences, you basically have a third that have said that they're not going to play. We have a third that have said that they are, or at least going to attempt to play in some form or fashion. And then the other third we're still waiting on, between the CCC and the NCAC, and actually I think and the NUMAC, being that other conference that we're still kind of waiting to hear on. I think the wheels are going to start turning in the next couple of days, and like you said on Twitter earlier this week, I think next Monday there could be some more announcements, but it does feel like there's some momentum picking up as we're now basically 4 weeks out, maybe 5, I guess, with a late September start. Most training camps were going to start around, let's say, August 17th, give or take a few days. So I think now as we're getting close to the official start time, there's some concerns.
You see on the screen the poll that we had put up on Twitter, and we are tracking it with 134 votes. Pretty quick tally so far after putting that up late this afternoon. You can see that I believe that is 42.5% believe there will be no season, and that has been increasing as the evening has gone on for obvious reasons. 38.8% say less than 150, which would be basically 100 or more teams saying no. So pessimism, we will say, is in the 78.3% range right now. More than 190 seems to be almost impossible if we continue at this pace. And 150 to 190 at 15.7%. Well, let's hope maybe that is the right one ultimately, and that only 1/7 of our respondents, or 1/6, get that one correct ultimately. JB, sitting here right now, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Do you think we're going to see an East Region season of any form? Do you think we'll see a Division III football season of any form? Go ahead.
Well, you know my motto that I quoted earlier today. I'd rather be an optimist and a fool than a pessimist and be right. So I feel like, just based on the information that we know about COVID from a national perspective, I mean, 80% of the cases and fatalities are confined within 13 states, mostly in the South, West, and East. 50 counties, pretty much the 70 to 80% of that. So on one hand, you could do devil's advocate and say, is this really a national problem if it's really confined to very specific hotspots? I mean, obviously, kids going back to college will be traveling to different locations, which is obviously a concern. But it's interesting that a lot of these conferences, especially the ones that we cover, are in areas where there's literally like 1 or 2 cases per 100,000 people, or maybe even less, and they're still shutting things down. I think that's being driven mostly by fear. There was a announcement today that at the Oxford University in London that there has been a vaccine that's been fast tracking through clinical trials and could be available in the next few weeks. And AstraZeneca, some large pharmaceutical companies, put in. They're going to distribute like 2 billion, something like that, some crazy number. So the optimist in me says, if we do have something like that could really mitigate the disease by September, then there probably will be a season. And maybe some of the schools that pulled the plug might be like, wait a minute, maybe we can do something. But if you're some people, might say, well, I mean, I know Matt Noonan, for instance, wrote an article recently saying that, you should just pull the plug on football. It's not worth it. I don't agree with that necessarily for other, for reasons we've talked about ad nauseum. But so I feel like some kind of season is going to happen, especially in different parts of the country. I think it'll be regionalized. It just might be a very, very small grouping of schools who are willing to try to make it work. And unfortunately, if games become a problem to schedule, then maybe they all just say forget it and look to the NCAA to plan some kind of spring season, whether that's safe or not. I mean, is it more safe than than this? I don't know.
Well, we got a couple comments coming through, some confidential. We'll mention one on Twitter I saw. We're coming up to the half-hour mark here, so we'll begin to close down and review real quickly. Before we do leave, again, this is a special live show for those just joining us. on Facebook Live and Twitter as well, at least on a link. First, one person points out, and I think this is one of the affected conferences they're from. The cure can't be worse than the cure can't be worse than the virus. Basically, is the statement there. Something we've said in one of our shows back, I think in April, give or take, and I wholeheartedly believe in that as well. I think going to spring football is a cure that is worse than the virus when you think about the implications and so many levels, ultimately, compared to the fatality and effect rates that we see with COVID that we discussed on the July 3rd show. On the flip side, we had a tweet, Frank Rossi, how can the NCAA give guidance on COVID testing when very few of us can get a test? That's like Ivanka telling the unemployed to get a job. I think she said something like, find something new is what the quote was, but okay. And here's the thing. First things first, we need to know what the NCAA feels is a requirement for safety purposes of what schools should do. Give us the baseline. Then we can fill in the blanks as schools and conferences as to whether we can fulfill it or not at this point. We don't know what the baseline is. So, yeah, you could be very well right, Mr. Twitter folk, but at the same time, we don't know. If suddenly they give new information next week that you need a test every 72 hours or 72 hours before a contest and it's not going to be possible to be done, suddenly we're going to rip the plug out of a bunch of students that already made plans to go back to campus because the announcements were already made. That's what the problem is. We have no baseline right now from the NCAA. We have no date of a first game for scheduling. We don't know if there's going to be playoffs or if they aim to have playoffs, when they would start. We know nothing right now. And schools and student athletes have a right to more information than this at this point. For as much as we've learned in the last 4 months, we are acting like some real morons across the board. I hate to say it, but we got to do better than this. And we're not. Yeah,
the only thing I'll add is that, in times of crisis, the kind of communication you need is the over communication. There needs to be a lot more than this sort of state of, I don't know, it's going to happen. I guess we'll wait another day, see if anyone else cancels their season. Well, maybe we'll wait another week and see what happens then. It's just unfortunate that as time drags on, the longer we wait, it's a shame for particularly the kids and their families who are trying to make some pretty critical life decisions. So.
JB, why don't you run through, I'm working on a possible guest real quick here. Why don't you run through the conferences to the degree we have them in the news that we've broken during this, and I'll be right back in to help you out with that.
All right. Well, as we know, the conferences that have announced that they do plan to play in September for now are the Liberty League, the MAC, and then even though today the ECFC said that they were canceling fall sports as a conference, they did indicate that their member schools could go out and schedule games should they want to have a season, and the conference would support and help them to the extent that they could. They're not going to count what would normally be a conference game as one that basically tells me that their Pool A bid has gone poof, but that's not a surprise. There's no way we're going to have all the Pool A's that we normally would see in a given year. So and we don't even have no idea what the NCAA is going to talk to us about playoff wise, probably for another couple months. So don't hold your breath. We're still waiting for updates from the CCC, the NJAC, and the new MAC. I did see a question posted earlier about WPI. We mentioned earlier in the show, we're not sure. We hope Coach Rob and the engineers get to play, but given the fact that these guys had to bail, RPI, one of their other top rivals, had to as well. It's going to be tough. I mean, maybe the WPI can reunite with some old Liberty League foes. Same thing with Springfield and perhaps even the Coast Guard. They all used to be in that conference about a decade ago, so that's a possibility, I suppose. And finally, earlier we found out that the Empire 8 may not be participating in fall sports, and we expect an announcement tomorrow morning potentially that the MASCAC will also follow that lead. We already knew about the NESCAC, although it was interesting, some of the rumor mill around Coach Cosgrove, who was actually an FCS University of Maine guy. Maybe not, since he's not such a long-time D3 guy, he'll just sort of, do us a little Maverick stuff and schedule some games against the Black Bears or something up there, maybe Husson or UNE. We'll see. But we know that Coach Murray from Hamilton was also on a news broadcast saying that they would potentially look at having games outside their conference if they can. I don't recall whether or not Hamilton had pulled the plug officially or not, or if they're keeping things open-minded. But that's kind of where we're at right now. And as the dominoes keep falling, we could see, as we said, 15% of the division, which is about 37 teams, are saying that they're out. Tomorrow we could add another 20, give or take, and we'll bump that up. But still, as of now, the majority are still either going to try and play or at least thinking about it. Haven't announced. We know the ODAC has down in Virginia, and there will be some other conferences throughout the country, maybe the WIAC and others that we should hear from soon as well.
JB, we have a guest actually joining us, surprise guest, Lake Forest head coach and I believe still technically chair of the selection committee. Jim Catanzaro is joining us live by phone right now, actually. And you're not going to be able to get your questions across, but I will pass them on as we do this. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How you guys doing?
We've had better nights, Jim. We have reported the Empire 8 is most likely about 19 minutes away from pulling the plug on their football season. The MASCAC is about 13 hours away from announcing the end of their fall 2020 campaign. The NJAC is considering spring football. We've gone through our 9 conferences of the East region tonight to sort of talk about the decisions made. From the selection committee point of view right now, what are the implications of announcements like these, and what are you seeing and feeling right now about the possibility of playoffs happening at all for a 2020 season?
I think those hopes are starting to dwindle a little bit, just as the participation starts to decrease. I do know that, if you start getting under 205, at that point we're still in our normal 32-team bracket where we should be, since we don't have equal access that the NCAA says. But I think that if we start dropping into the low hundreds, it's kind of hard to have a national championship, situation when less than half of the pool is playing. Less than half of the teams are actually playing. I think that there is a lot of, this is personal opinion, not scientifically backed. I think there's a lot of people that are jumping to this conclusion. The NCAA has not released their revised return to play protocols yet. There's been kind of a leak on that there may be certain things in there that teams either can't afford or can't get access to in terms of testing and things like that, but those things have not been officially made yet. They were supposed to be early this week. They haven't gone out, and so I think that there's some very preemptive strikes going on right now within the conferences to get that, but I also know that, as a coach, I've got a lot of families trying to figure out when they're supposed to be on campus and when are they supposed to get those plane tickets for and things like that. And I think that schools are starting to find a lot of pressure to make decisions, even if they don't have the information from the NCAA that they would like to have.
JB, you have any questions? I'll confer them over to him.
Yeah, well, with this lack of information, and for our viewers who may not be familiar with Lake Forest, beautiful liberal arts college in the suburbs of Chicago, Coach Cat is a big proponent of the Arizona high school football scene, and obviously Arizona being one of the hot spots here nationally. Coach, what kind of communications and questions are you getting from the guys, especially from the more affected 13 states like I referred to earlier, the Arizonas, the Floridas of the world? What are these families looking to you to find out, and what can you tell them?
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry, so I'm going to need to kind of clarify the question for me. Sorry.
Sure. Basically, what are you telling kind of the Arizona high school recruits, families right now about what to do since it's a highly affected state and everything else? What kind of guidance can you provide them?
Yeah, so, as of right now, we are status quo at Lake Forest College. We're bringing our guys back on the same day. Nothing has changed as far as that goes. We have a plan in place for all of our athletes for the fall semester that we feel really, really good about, but I have recently found that we're kind of unique and that we were already planning on doing significant testing with our team. And so the bigger thing that's kind of popping up recently is the city of Chicago has a 2-week quarantine on any people from some of the kind of hot spots right now. I think they have that maybe in New York with Florida and a couple of places. And
we have 22 states right now.
Chicago has copied that.
Yep.
Fortunately, we are not in the Chicagoland city limits, so we don't have to do that. But we basically plan on every single kid that comes to Lake Forest College, any student, not just athletes, is getting tested their first day on campus and will be in quarantine until their test results come back, which should be within 24 hours. So we have a partnership with a medical college that is doing the research for us and doing all the testing for us. So we'll know within 24 hours of the kid being on campus if they're at that time, having the virus. So we're right now planning on doing all that, and we are, obviously everybody's kind of waiting to see what happens with the NCAA as a whole. This concept that spring football is a guaranteed thing is not a guaranteed thing yet. There's nothing that has been passed for that. There are several proposals that are out there. We even worked through another one today on the AFCA D3 Coaches Council. It has a representative from every Division III council in it, or every Division III conference. So we are looking at a lot of different options, but right now it's still fall sports until something changes. And so we are waiting for that. I know our conference has previously announced that we are planning on being here in the fall and playing, and a number of our other conferences in our area have kind of put it as we're going to be conference only. I do think that, I think it was one of you guys who maybe said, or maybe it was Pat at D3 Football that said, schools in the Midwest maybe should be making their decision based on what's happening in Texas or what's happening in Arizona when it's nothing like what they're experiencing where they are right now, where it's a little bit maybe more under control. And so I think it's a really hard thing to make a national decision, and you really got to leave it up to the local institutions and conferences. And I think that some places are maybe getting a little preemptive before they have all the information finalized.
Jim, I got two questions for you. First, you talked about testing protocols, and to the degree that you know or think you know what the NCAA may be advising ultimately here, what do you think the cost factor is going to be? What do you think the effect is on a budget like Lake Forest football budget or sports budget for all fall sports, especially since we probably are going to be experiencing a truncation of the schedule itself, losing a few games possibly, going to 7 instead of 10 games in football and, similar cuts in other sports. What is the balance ultimately for those that don't understand if they had to get a student athlete tested 72 hours before a weekend of a game, let's say, or something along those lines? What is the cost effect?
Yeah, so if you just take a football program and just, I can speak for what we've talked about. We have like I said, we have a little different agreement, but the common number that we're hearing right now from most of the Division III coaches across the country is that a COVID test is going to be about $70 per test to get that done. If you times that by a 100-man football roster, which I would say is pretty close to the norm, you're looking at $7,000 a week to play a football game just to test. That doesn't include any other expenses and any other monitoring or anything like that you might be doing. If you times that by let's say 8 games, if you're playing maybe a conference-only schedule instead of the max 10, that's $56,000 right there just for your football program to do it. Now, if you're trying to do that with a couple of other sport teams, with your soccer programs, your volleyball program, they're playing more games, less people, but more games. I had one coach share that their athletic department budget for the fall only would be near $165,000 just to test. And so that number is a big number in a year where many schools were running probably at a loss in the spring semester because of the COVID refunds that they may have given out. The enrollments, right now there's a lot of hesitancy in what I like to refer to as the normal humans that are attending small private colleges on whether or not they should do a semester at home, do things online. There's been some things there where I think when you start adding 6 figures to play sports, addition to what you're already paying for travel and everything else, is that, where does that money come from? And some schools are in better situations than others to foot that bill.
Another question for you before I get JB another one. Essentially, you've been outspoken on Twitter the last week or so about decision-making, leadership, et cetera, in certain realms. I know you're still the selection committee chair, but, for another 2 or 3 weeks, I'm guessing, based on if my math's right there, Dewey Nats will be taking over that role. But what are your concerns? What are your criticisms at this point? And, to what degree is it panning out over the last few days now that more schools have kind of said no?
Well, much of my concerns are kind of the same as what got me involved in the national committee, is that the coach's voice is not being undertaken. I think that the student-athlete voice is being very not listened to really at all, to be honest with you, because the joy of Division III is that there's not a scholarship for football participation that is holding an athlete and requiring them to play in order to have access to their education, which is what is the case at the Division I level. For many of those students, if they lose that scholarship, they don't have access to their degree at that institution. At Lake Forest, at RPI, at Union, doesn't matter. That financial aid is not going to change whether or not a young man plays football. And that should allow them a little bit of their choice, to go into whether or not they want to play their season with an educated mindset. I do think that the other part that's really frustrated me, and I've been outspoken about this, whether it's in particularly at the NCAA level, the failure to give the information or to make a decision or to provide insight that has been requested of them by schools, by conferences in a timely manner has been disappointing. The focus has been more on how do we get Alabama and LSU onto the field, not how does what we say about them affect the Division II and Division III realms. And that part has been, to me, pretty frustrating, to be honest with you, is that we're sitting here talking about trying to navigate between what is mandatory, what is a recommendation, and what is a guideline. And nobody from the organization that released the initial return to play protocols is willing to clarify, what things are kind of, you have to do this. And there is a component of what was released in the initial return to play protocols that was generated for the summer workouts that Division I schools were having, and those then became applied to all sports, all at every level, even though that wasn't what was initially being portrayed as what needed to be done for a season. And their failure to communicate in a timely manner and sit on their hands has been a little bit frustrating. I also wish that some schools would fully admit to why they're doing what they're doing and just for budget purposes, that we can't afford to do it. It's not that they're taking the health and wellness of their athletes more. It's that they don't want to pay to protect the health and wellness of their athletes. And I think that, I come from a very fortunate institution where our president has gone out and signed the agreements and gotten everything done so we'd be ready to play. And I know there's other schools like that, but there's other schools that are hiding behind the fact that we're not willing to pay $60,000, $70,000 to test, or we're going to have our students come back to campus and, hope that it works itself out. And I think that there is a component to that where the communication has not been clear from a lot of individuals who are the assigned leaders of either a conference or a school or the headlining, the national organization, where it's like, don't withhold the information, don't leak little things just to see how it plays in the room. Let's get the information that's necessary for 240 institutions in football and however many more in soccer and beyond, where they can start working with their athletes to give them guidance so they're not continuing to be anxious waiting for decisions. Or give yourself dates and deadlines when there's going to be information released and stick to them.
JB, before I give you the next question, I just want to let you know that I received a DM from a player in D3 who I won't name. Says, I understand canceling our season 100%, but canceling high school football would do much more harm than good. I hope they play. Kind of a selfless statement there from one of our own here in Division III, in our East region, in fact. Go ahead. I'll give you the next question. Give it over to Jim.
All right, Coach. One of the things when we were looking at sort of how things could play out, when we sort of, I guess this could be a reality check. With basically limited or no non-conference games, trying to keep things as regional, close together. What, from your perspective, is the travel cost savings really, going to help offset the testing, or is it really, those travel costs were sunk anyway because you're going to play 7 games and you're going to be on the road for half of them. And then I guess the other question I would add too is from your perspective, just based on maybe your area of the country, why are some of the other some pretty significant Midwestern conferences sort of still sitting on their hands when yours and others have already announced?
Jim, go ahead.
Okay, so the big thing, to give you an idea on the conference only place, so we had a non-conference game scheduled this year that was going to be a travel game overnight. It would have been a $12,000 cost for that game for our team to go to that game. So that maybe buys you a week and a half of testing, so to speak, or maybe it funds some of the other protocols that are going into place. So I don't mind the conference only mindset that a lot of schools are going to. I also think that it's broader than the just football perspective when it comes to that if football plays 80% of their games now, other sports may only be playing 80% of their games. And there is a Title IX component to that we have to be cognizant of. And so to respect that and limit some of the exposures in the other sports, whereas football is that team that only plays 10, our other teams are looking to play 20 to 25, and what's the percentages, not necessarily the actual contest played. But $12,000 for us not playing our non-conference game would go back into that budget. I think that would be a reasonable sacrifice to have the other 8 games that we would be playing in a conference schedule. As far as I think there was something else there about the Midwest Conference, the other Midwest conferences that are maybe not making their decisions. I really do think that a lot of them have been waiting for the NCAA to release the return to play protocols, because if the return to play protocols do include weekly testing, and that's mandatory now, that budget changes for a lot of other people, or even just the access to tests. I talked to a coach today that's from a more rural location. Initially, they had only had 200 COVID tests sent to their school by the local county, and those 200 actually got pulled back from them within the last 2 weeks because of an outbreak in their county that had seen a larger number of testing going on. So some of the schools literally just can't get access to the tests because the hospitals in the county and the state government are not going to give them the limited number of tests that maybe they have in that area. Some of the areas where there are more metropolitan areas, things like that, they're a little bit easier to get a hold of. So I do think that is playing a role, that until they know exactly what the protocols are, if the protocols are the 6-week resocialization of sport and that's it, I think you see a bunch of Division III schools question why they canceled, or if that's what it is, they can do that. You're also seeing some schools, and this is one of the things that was the underreported part of the Ivy League canceling, is that 3 of the schools had already canceled classes in person on campus. And as soon as they made that decision, they could not have sports. So it was a casualty of their already made decision not have in-person classes. It wasn't let's not put the cart before the horse on that one. And so I think that as some schools are trying to look at their academic calendars and are trying to look on whether or not they're actually going to be able to have on-campus classes and things of that nature, that's playing a role as well. But I do believe that, the most important thing is we have to take care of our own communities now and not have, what I would call silly behavior taking place. And I do concern that we're making a decision for, basically 8 weeks from now, the second week of September in July, when we saw how much things changed in the last 2 to 3 weeks. What happens if they change the other way in 2 to 3 weeks? Are we rushing to make the decision rather than letting us see where we are at that point? And I think in talking to some of our players, they would rather we cancel the season on September 5th than cancel it in July.
Good point. JB's got one more quick one for you.
Yeah, Coach. We've seen a lot of stuff online, and I've got a lot of tchotchke junk in my office here. But as a football coach, the mouth guards that players wear typically covers the entire mouth, or at least is something that would, in theory, we know scientifically that droplets can be the primary, or the main carriers of the virus. If you have this mouthpiece in, plus there's been some stuff online about an additional sort of plastic shield that could go in a face mask. I mean, have any of these sort of equipment sort of discussions been going on at Lake Forest or even at the NCAA level, where The fact that there are these certain things that are blocking the mouth, which is the primary way this virus could be transmitted. Is that even been brought up, or is it more just like, well, we need to figure out the high level stuff before we even get into worries about equipment and all that kind of crap?
Jim? Go ahead, Jim. Did we lose you, Jim?
No, I didn't know which Jim you were going to.
That's a good point. James Baker, you're right.
So, you talk a
Just
little bit
call
about
me JB.
the equipment that's out there. I can tell you what we're doing at Lake Forest. We had already put into place where we had bought the gaiters that kind of go up over the neck and over the mouth for all physical activity that our guys would be taking place in. We also had purchased the splash shields that Shutt Manufacturing came out for their helmet inserts, which is basically a shield over the eyes and a shield over the mouth. There's unfortunately, because this is all kind of going as fast as we can, there's no science to prove that that's going to, but the logic says that if you have a piece of plastic between your face and the next person, that at the worst case scenario, it's going to hit that shield before it hits the person. And so we had already made that purchase. It's a relatively low investment. I think it costs us about $1,700 to outfit our whole team. Oakley just came out with theirs, which is a very different version of what they have. And, I kind of laughed that, almost every kid that we've ever had that was a super skilled player wanted to wear a shield, and they couldn't because it was against the rules, and now it's not against the rules, and they're not going to want to wear it. So it's, we're not wearing it because it's cool. We're wearing it because it can protect us. And, but you're seeing some of the Division I players already say, I'm not going to do it. It's going to be too hot. It's going to be too much this. It's going to be too much that. So like I said, we had already kind of put into place that we had the gaiters, the gaiters to go over your mouth for just a base layer, and then the shield. And when you think about that, that's about $25 expense on an athlete that seems well worth it if that gives us a chance to play football.
Guys, I just want to, since we kind of got into this whole situation based on what the Empire 8 was going to be announcing, I'm going to show on the screen right now, the Empire 8 during this live broadcast has just come out with their guidance. I will read it briefly, and then Jim will give you one more question. It states, Empire 8 member institutions have been working since the advent of COVID to ensure the health and safety of all members of our respective communities, including our student athletes, as we anticipate reopening our campuses this fall. The league adopted the NCAA guidelines for the resocialization of sport, developed a detailed pandemic protocol handbook, and approved modified schedules for the season. However, the continued evolution of the virus has presented significant new challenges for safe athletics competition. As such, the Empire 8 President's Council has unanimously voted to postpone all fall competition in the sports of men's and women's, excuse me one second as I get something on my way there, cross country, field hockey, football, men's golf, men's and women's soccer, women's tennis, and women's volleyball. Individual Empire 8 institutions continue to have the ability to engage in athletic-related activity this fall to provide beneficial opportunities for their student athletes and teams in accordance with local health policy. The Empire 8 is committed to providing all fall student athletes with a meaningful conference regular season and championship tournament experience in the spring of 2021, provided it is safe to do so. We are currently developing models and conference schedules to prepare for a successful experience. The health and wellness of our athletes and our campus communities will continue to be a top priority as we finalize those plans. Decisions surrounding winter sports competition will be made at a later time. We will continue to provide updates as information becomes available. Jim, give me a reaction to that, and then the overall final question I got for you is, are we going to have a 2020 fall football season in Division III to the degree you can tell right now? What's your prediction?
So that's disappointing to hear from the Empire 8, obviously, and for all the reasons that I've already said. They're basically saying that they're okay with teams practicing with their full roster on campus, providing that meaningful opportunity. But the issue is you're willing to do the practices, but you're not necessarily willing to allow them to compete against other people. And I think that's the kind of concerns that we're going to allow all our 100 players to still practice and go through all of that, but we're not going to have our games. And I just wish that I could have somebody from the NCAA, and I don't necessarily hold this against the conferences because maybe they're getting different information that says we can have a spring football season. Because I've got real issues with the mindset of, we're going to play a 10-game football season in the spring, have it end somewhere in the middle of May, and then turn around and play another 10-game season in the fall. And so this is a contact, concussion, orthopedic issue, as well as the mental stress and anxiety that's going to put on student-athletes to be in a double-in season in a 6-month window, when we've already said that those issues are troubling for the future of the football. We talk about playing football, and 2 years ago, all everybody wanted to talk about was concussions and limiting contact and doing that. And now we're going to put that all into a very small window of time to make their bodies have to recover. And I'm not very much in favor of that at all. So I'm probably one of the few coaches that will say I don't want a 10-game season in the spring and following that up with a 10-game season in the fall. I don't think that's healthy for our players.
You're not the only one saying that by far. I will tell you that from our conversations with coaches. About 90% of them admit that fact. But again, let me go back to that last question. Are we going to have a season?
My heart says I hope so, but as you said, maybe in one of your tweets, I think it was today, I'd rather be an optimist and be wrong than be a pessimist and be right. So I'm hopeful, but I think it's going to take a lot of things, and I think it will be very different from any football season we've ever seen before if it does happen. But I have my doubts, but I'm hopeful.
Jim, we always appreciate you, my friend, joining us, and we're going to miss you as committee chair, but we are going to still be following Lake Forest football like fiends out there, and hope that you do suit up, with your players at least, suit up and get on that field, that you're coaching it somewhere, maybe even outside the player's box for your safety, potentially, and any other coach doing the same. There are so many ways to handle this, ultimately, and we've talked, you and I, amongst ourselves, about a lot of the possibilities of it. Let's hope we get to test some of them and test them wisely in the fall season. That's the biggest thing. We're not giving many opportunities to really put to work what we know already, and we talked about this earlier in the show before you joined us, that we sort of are acting a little bit moronic at times, despite having a whole litany of information we did not have 4 months ago. And I appreciate your kind of reality check about a lot of that as we've gone along here. So thank you again for joining us.
No problem. My pleasure. You guys have a great night.
You too now.
Thanks, Coach.
That was insightful, to say the least, JB, and always appreciate his candor. Went longer than we thought we would in this show. We're at about 1 hour. We're going to cut it here. Again, Empire 8 has announced that we are not going to have an Empire 8 Fall 2020 football season, but maybe a spring one. They are more heavy-toned in terms of suggesting they will, compared to most conferences out there, in fact. The MASCAC will probably be announcing at 10 a.m. tomorrow the same, and possibly limited institutional football games, like 1 or 2 perhaps one-offs, if a school wants to play fall football against 1 or 2 opponents. It may be possible from what I'm understanding, but I wouldn't necessarily bet the house on it happening either. ECFC not sponsoring conference contests, but they're going to allow their conference members to schedule how they want to if they want to play their fall sports. The Liberty League still deciding what to do now in light of the Empire 8 decision. NUMAC, Lost MIT, awaiting a decision later in the week. CCC have not heard. NESCAC allowing their members to do a non-conference scheduling like the ECFC, but unlikely many will take them up on it. The NJAC possibly looking at spring football instead, but fall sports otherwise going forward is what we're hearing currently is on the table. That's a rumor, not definitive. And MAC looking like they are going forward with their season as conference only. That's what we have right now. We will keep you updated on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll be back probably sometime later this week or early next week with some more information about what spring football would really mean at the end of the day. For JB, have a good night, folks.